Here's the big question I want to ask you. What can we do to completely ruin our kids' sleep lives?
Okay.
Is there anything like there's some good things we can do, but what are like the worst things? Like, hey, like worst practices, don't do these things or else your kid's going to have a
Yeah.
hard time sleeping.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Intentional Father Podcast, where us fathers parent our children not by accident, but with intent. I'm your host, Aaron Stroman.
Well, Jemma, it's great to have you on the show today. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself before we jump into the conversation?
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, my name's Jem. I am a sleep consultant here in the UK. I work online and worldwide, though, and I support families with young children to get better sleep without doing the traditional old-fashioned sleep training like control crying and cry it out. So very much about attachment and working with families to find the unique path that will help them to get better sleep because we're all different, right?
Yep. Yeah. How important is sleep in a young child's life?
Well, sleep is fundamental to all our health and well-being, isn't it? To get the rest that we need allows us to have the energy that we need to get through the day, the focus to learn, to connect. And actually, I think surprisingly, we have quite different needs versus adults versus children. And what sometimes I find is difficult in the sleep industry, because of course, people like me are selling services, coaching families to improve sleep, is actually there's quite a bit of scaremongering that can go on sometimes. And a big focus is often on children needing loads and loads of sleep all in one go. Sleeping through the night is, really important. Big long naps of a couple of hours to get restorative sleep. And there's a lot of pressure on parents to make sure that the children are sleeping all night, having really good long naps. And unfortunately, that's not how children sleep.
Hmm.
Biologically, they don't sleep like that. And, it's very normal for young children to wake up a few times during the night, for them to only sleep for what we think is a short nap, because we're kind of told that our children should sleep for 2 hours. So if our children are doing 30-minute naps or 40-minute naps or even 10-minute naps here and there, we worry that that's not going to be enough for them. And certainly in the baby phase, I think for children to be expected to sleep for 12 hours overnight without waking, that's just really not biologically normal. But parents have heard that that's what should happen, so they get really stressed about it. So absolutely, adults need sleep solidly like that because we only sleep once a day. But children can manage really well, and it's very normal for them to still wake up quite a lot in the early years. There's a statistic that it's about 85% of children under 18 months will still wake in the night.
Okay.
And I think that's quite a lot, isn't it? And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't expect that they're still going to be waking up in the night when the child's 18 months.
Yeah. So are there metrics as far as like ages and what should be considered normal or biologically acceptable?
Yeah, and I think there's been the National Sleep Foundation website's a really good resource for having a look at a guide for what you might expect your child to sleep. And what's actually really interesting is they don't specify day sleep versus night sleep. They don't say they should sleep 10 hours overnight and 3 hours of naps. They just say in 24 hours, they should sleep somewhere between 9 and 13 hours.
Okay.
So within that range, you're going to have children who are high sleep needs children who will be closer to 13 hours in 24. But then you're going to have children who are on the lower end of that as well, because we're all different. We all have different sleep needs. I'm sure all the listeners will be the same. Me and my partner, my husband, he's a low sleep needs person. He can go to bed at 11 o'clock, at 12 o'clock at night, and then wake up at 6 and feel great. I have to be asleep for 11 and wake up at 7. Otherwise, I'm not so quick on my on my feet usually.
Uh-huh.
So we're all very different, and children are the same in that sense that some will need more than others. So there's not necessarily a split of day versus night sleep that's ideal to aim for. And it's understanding what your individual child needs, which is the best approach for children. So yeah, it's not as easy as just having a set number of hours that everybody needs at a certain age group. And typically they'll sleep somewhere between 10 and 12 hours overnight, and then do somewhere between 1 and 2 hours during the day. for the first
Okay.
few years.
Okay. That might take some pressure off of parents who are not sure what to expect or expect more than what their
And I
kids
think
do. And
that's the difficulty, because there's a lot of information out there putting a lot of pressure on the need for sleep. And whilst it is absolutely important for everybody, children's sleep is very, very variable. I don't know if you remember it with yours being teenagers now, but in the early days, there's so much development in the first year, 18 months, 2 years. You go home with your newborn baby who doesn't even know how to feed. And then within a year, some of them are walking, they're starting to be able to communicate. There's just such a lot of development that goes on in those 2 years. Language skills, social skills, walking, crawling, all the stuff that they're able to do. And it's no wonder that sleep is impacted, because each change in the brain can impact how they sleep. So all these changes just mean that you can have a really unsettled couple of years. So the message where we're telling parents that children should sleep for long periods and be sleeping all the night without waking, it's actually quite damaging to some families, and it's setting too high expectations for parents, and they wonder if they're doing something wrong, or if there's something wrong with the child.
yeah.
Causes a lot of stress.
Okay. I want to throw you a curveball here.
Okay.
So everybody wants to know what can I do to help my kids sleep better? Before we answer that question, here's the big question I want to ask you. What can we do to completely ruin our kids' sleep lives?
Okay.
Is there anything like there's some good things we can do, but what are like the worst things? Like, hey, worst practices, don't do these things or else your kid's going to have a hard time sleeping.
Yeah. So I would say there's some really obvious ones, like exposure to blue light. So TV screens, phones, just before bed. The science tells us that blue light impacts melatonin production. Melatonin is the hormone that makes you feel sleepy and helps you to stay asleep. So there is lots of research, and you hear it about us. We're told not to use our phones just before bed as well. So letting the kids watch TV too close to bedtime, or having them watch the tablet or use your phone within a couple of hours of bedtime is not ideal for sleep hygiene, which is helping optimize the environment and your child's internal systems to make the best possible use of sleep. So definitely not blue screens and TV. That being said, like, I'm a mum of two. So if I'm doing bedtime by myself and my husband's working away, I have to do solo bedtime. I can't be in two places at once. So that being said, some nights I do have to put my 6-year-old son in front of the TV while I go to do bedtime with my daughter, who's 4, and he has to sit and watch TV for 45 minutes, and then I'll go and do his bedtime. So I'm also realistic about these things, that in some instances, you just have to do it. We are all real parents fighting our way through life, that in modern society that's not easy. So sometimes you can't change that. So I'm not somebody who's going to come across people and be judgmental about TV screens, but it's not best practice, right?
Right.
What I also find is one of the biggest things that impacts sleep is children's temperament, so who they are in their DNA. And there are 9 congenital personality traits that we can see in young babies and children, and some that you can even recognise in utero, so whilst the children are still in the womb. And it's fascinating. So there are certain temperament traits that make it harder for certain children to come to sleep in a calm way and stay asleep. And unless parents know these and recognise these temperament traits, sometimes they're kind of not able to support their child in the best possible way to get them to go to sleep. So I think one of the things that you can do is you can really sabotage your child's sleep if you don't understand their temperament and adapt your routines and your habits to support what they need. And often as parents, we're looking for kind of an easy thing to help us. So we look for carbon copy, one size fits all sleep schedules or bedtime routine tips. And actually, the best thing that you can do is find the thing that works for your child. And that's going to be a different nap routine to your friend or your sister or your best friend's mum who's got their child sleeping through. And a lot of it is working on what works for your family and kind of being able to block out the white noise of everything else that's going on. So I definitely think that sometimes parents can sabotage their sleep by trying to do something that's a one size fits all approach that just it just doesn't. One size does not fit all, because all babies are different, all children are different, and every family is different. So it's really digging into that, understanding your child is the best tip that I can give people. And that's not easy to do when you're first starting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Okay.
It's a big learning curve, isn't
it? Yeah. And let me ask specifically about this one, because from the dad vantage point, I don't know if this is good or bad. So you can educate all of us, but I think there's an intuitive idea that if we play with our kids and wear them out, so go outside and play football or soccer, and exhaust, kind of physically exhaust the kids. Is that good? Is that bad because it's winding them up? Is it situational based on the child? How would you speak to that?
Yeah, and I get this a lot, because predominantly, I'm going to be really honest, I work with mums, because often it's the mums that are, struggling with sleep more so because they're having to breastfeed and do a lot of the night wakes and things like that, and a lot of the naps, because there's often parent preference to the mum. So I tend to work with the mums. And I love it when I've got dads on board as well, because, sleep and parenting is a team effort, right? But there is definitely a frustration with some parents, some mums that are like, oh, daddy comes home from work, not seeing the kids all day, and then he's throwing them up and down, like, like you say, winding them up. And absolutely, in the last half hour, 45 minutes before bedtime, that might not be the most sensible thing to do as far as getting them really excited and agitated. Sort of, like I say, 45 minutes or so before they actually need to be asleep. But on the flip side, all that stuff is amazing, particularly for the toddlers, which is my favourite age range to work with, so children between 1 and 3 years old. What the difference with toddlers and baby sleep? Baby sleep's a lot about timing. Can we get the timing and the routines right, working well for them? With toddlers, because they've got this insane need for independence and this insane energy level, absolutely we need to get that out of their system. If you're keeping your evening really calm and quiet and sedate, your toddler's going to be bouncing off the walls. I don't know if you use that phrase in the US, but they're going to be bouncing off the walls when it comes to doing bedtime, because they've got all this pent up energy. Toddlers are little balls of energy. So certainly with toddlers and older children, I always say to parents, in your evening, when you come back together as a family after work and you're in the run up to bedtime, absolutely do stuff that is getting some of that energy out. And the beauty of doing that as well is it really builds connection, because the thing with toddlers and preschool age children, so sort of from 1 till 5 years old, they struggle with separation at bedtime. It's a really huge thing that at bedtime, they know that you're going to disappear downstairs and they'll be left in their room by themselves. And that is a really big thing for them to cope with. And the best way that you can anticipate those bedtime challenges around that separation is by doing loads of connection work beforehand. So playing with them, getting rid of that energy, laughing together, rough housing, which is kind of, the silly play that is very physical. That might be tickle time if they like it, play wrestling, football, soccer, doing obstacle courses around the sitting room, physical stuff like that. It builds connection and it gets rid of energy. So big tips, just not right before sleep time.
It's just not right before bed. So for dads, if you're working late, don't expect to come home and play right before bedtime. So get home a little early, get that quality time in, and then land the plane as we're heading to bed. Okay, good.
Absolutely.
That's
and
valuable.
I get it, because it's really hard if you're working parents and you only see your children for an hour a day before they need to go to sleep. It's really hard not to just be really excited to see them, isn't it? And want to do all that. But you can find other ways to connect that are not quite so exuberant.
Right. Right. Reading a book, is that a good
Fabulous.
calming
Yeah,
pre-bedtime
that's
routine?
reading
Or
the book, and just some calm play. You can play together without it being super exciting. So the best thing to do with children of the age group I'm talking about, sort of toddlers and preschoolers, the best thing to do with them is let them guide the play. They're craving independence and they love to have some autonomy in their lives. Toddlers don't get a lot of choice about what goes on in their life. They're told what to wear, where to go there, when to eat, and that's really hard for them. So if you can give them some autonomy in play, that's how children best learn, through play. So if you can let them lead that, then that just ticks another box. They're feeling like they have some part in the choices that they've made that evening. And again, that can really help with bedtime routine challenges. Definitely. So yeah, jigsaws, shape sorters, even just kind of sitting with them in the same room and letting them just play and you narrate what they do. So dinosaurs crawling up my leg. Oh, he's not gonna bite me. Oh, I can see you're building a lovely tower. Literally just narrate what they're doing, because they feel like you're really paying attention and they feel really super connected with that kind of play. And you don't even always have to do anything yourself.
wow.
Just be there.
Yeah. I think that's more than just good sleep advice. That's good parenting advice.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think certainly with this age group, play is a huge thing. It's all about connection and how you build on that, particularly when you've been separate, if you've been at work or they've been in daycare. It's all about coming back together as a family unit and feeling super connected again. And dads are great at play, right? I mean, stereotypically and biologically as well, typically it's the woman that does the nurturing, and the dad that does the play and the energetic fun and that kind of thing. And I think sometimes that's what our children look to us for. That certainly happens in my house. Was that similar for you? Was that your kind of role with your children?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's a really good role to play. But like I say, choose your times with what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, so I guess we kind of transition from what should we not do to what should we do? Any other best practices that you think, man, we gotta, don't miss this one?
Yeah, I mean, start with the easy things as far as sleep goes. So understanding a bit about sleep biology and how sleep works, and just optimizing everything so that you're starting from the best foot forwards. So I talked a little bit about melatonin, that sleepy hormone that we need to help us feel tired and ready to go to sleep, but that also helps us to stay asleep for longer periods if melatonin's nice and high. So to optimize that, we need dim light. So dim light will help melatonin be produced later on in the evening. So particularly in the summer months, when you've got a really bright house and the sun's coming through all evening, you can help yourself a little bit by drawing the blinds, drawing the curtains, and just keeping the house quite dim in the evenings, just to help that melatonin start to rise earlier on, so that hopefully your child will be tired earlier on in summer. Absolutely get rid of loads of energy, build on connection. As far as timings go, if your child's still napping, I don't tend to suggest that parents have a very static bedtime in mind, and you kind of have a bit of a more of a movable bedtime depending on how the nap went during the day. So particularly if your child's in daycare some days and at home other days, you can find that naps happen at different times. So what can happen if you have like a goal in mind for what time bedtime should be? Some days they might be undertired and not quite ready for sleep, and other days they might be overtired. And in both instances, you're going to find it hard to get them to go to sleep, and the quality of the nighttime sleep potentially also going to be impacted too. So I tend to suggest that parents just have a reasonably flexible bedtime time to aim for, or aim it off roughly when the nap finished. So you're not kind of just aiming for a set time every night.
Right.
And one way you can bring some predictability if you are finding each day is very different is to get up at the same time every day. So, be really clear about, even if we have a bit of a rough night where, say, they woke up a few times, don't kind of try not to let them catch up with having a lie-in in the morning. So say to yourself, if they're not awake by 7 a.m., I'm going to get them up, even if they were awake quite a lot during the night, because that's going to help you bring some consistency to the rest of the day. And you can get yourself in a bit of a muddle if you have different wake up times every day, different nap times every day, and different bedtimes every day, because your circadian rhythm isn't regulated in that sense. So I consider having a consistent wake up time, have a reasonably consistent bedtime, but base it on the time of the last nap. Dim your lights in the evening to make sure that melatonin is as optimized as possible, and just have that lovely nurturing bedtime routine that you've really built on connection with them, and that is going to get you in a really good position as far as sleep biology goes. And they're all the easy things that you can do.
Great, man. That's I wish I would have had that advice with my firstborn, because I think we're always a bit more perfectionistic with our firstborn. But yeah, there is this idea of having that consistent, like, bedtime and wake time, but factoring in how did the nap go. Give yourself a little grace with exactly what time you put them down. That's great.
Yeah, it's the thing that I find most parents really struggle with, because it is kind of out there that, I mean, I don't know if you have the same sort of message in the US, but in the UK and in Europe, some places in Europe anyway, we kind of have it in our heads that children need to be in bed at 7 o'clock in the evening. And that actually sets lots of parents up to fail, because most children in the age group we're talking don't sleep for 12 hours overnight. They're going to sleep for 10, maybe 11 hours overnight. So if we're aiming to put them down at 7, even if they have a great night's sleep and do the average 10 hours, you're waking up at 5 a.m. Nobody wants to wake up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Like, I certainly don't anyway. So it's having a real understanding of how much sleep your child needs overnight, and just being comfortable with that. And it might just mean that sometimes they need a later bedtime than kind of told by society.
Uh-huh.
So it's having that confidence. And I think you touched on it just then, that with your first, you really have no idea, do you? You have nothing to compare to. And all you kind of have in the back of your mind is all the information that's out there. And there's tons of information about sleep. And you feel like you have to get it perfect. I think you're definitely a bit easier on your second, right? Which is second a better sleeper, Aaron?
Mine are a year apart, so they've almost always had about the same, same bedtime, and they both are pretty good sleepers. They still are. Yeah, they're 14 and 15 right now, and I still go in and say goodnight and pray with them, and there's a bit of that routine.
Yeah.
And I think that's I did that when they were little, and I'm doing that, and they both have their permits and they're driving. And even my daughter, sometimes she'll ask for it. She'll kind of yell, "Dad, I'm in bed."
Yeah,
ready. Okay, I'm coming. So, but yeah, I wish I would have been a little more graceful with myself on that, because I would put him down at the same time, and I didn't really think about letting the nap. I almost did the opposite. I was flexible with the morning wake up time based on their sleep. It's like, as you're talking about that, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done the opposite and just got them up, and they probably would have compensated later with their nap or the next night bedtime. But so that's, I think that's, it may feel counterintuitive, but that's what we need, right? Because what we intuitively feel isn't always the best things. We have to learn. And so
and do you know what, with that in mind, it's also okay to do what you said, but be mindful with that you're potentially going to lose your evening. So if you can maintain a consistent bedtime, a wake up time in the morning, maintain that consistent wake up time that's earlier rather than letting them catch up, then you're more likely to have an earlier bedtime. Whereas I mean, it depends on how you sleep yourself. I'm somebody who, well, before children, I was a night owl. I used to love staying up late. That's when I felt most energetic. I got my best work done in the afternoon into the evening, and I wanted to sleep in the morning. Since kids, my chronotype, which is what that's called, your propensity for morningness or eveningness, I've changed now. So I'm a bit to get up earlier, and I need to go to sleep earlier. And so for me, it doesn't work for me personally if my children are going to be up late because they slept in late. It doesn't work out for me because then I haven't got any time for myself. So I prefer to have my evening when the kids are down and I've got some time to myself to kind of relax, doom scroll on my phone, do some jobs around the house, just catch up on some TV, whatever. So I think it's absolutely fine to let them catch up in the morning if you've got an expectation that just means they're going to go to bed later. I find a lot of my clients, because they're very overwhelmed with tiredness, work and everything else, they actually prefer an earlier bedtime for the children. So that's where the consistent wake up time comes in. That gives you that at the other end of the day.
Yeah, that's good.
But none of it's. I'm not somebody who. I'm a sleep expert, right? A children's sleep expert. I'm not somebody who's going to dictate to you what is right for you and your family. We can talk today like what's best practice. And like I said at the start, watching TV before bed's not best practice. Do I do it? Yes. Do I let my kids do it sometimes? Yes. Because needs must. And gosh, there are some nights that I just want to talk to my husband about something important. So I put the TV on so the kids don't talk to me.
Yeah.
So, you can understand the best practice, but you've got to choose what's right for your family and what works best for you. So it's just having that information there to be able to make that decision, and having the confidence then to move forward in a way that works for you.
Okay. Let me ask 2 questions about liquids. I assume it's not good to give kids caffeinated drinks before bedtime. Is that a safe assumption?
Safe assumption.
Okay.
It's ideally, you're not going to give them caffeinated drinks at all. Just because obviously the bodies are really little and it's it's extra work on processing that through the systems. But I mean, things like chocolate has caffeine in. It's not just coffee and tea. In the UK, we've historically had a bit of a thing for giving children cups of tea, and that has caffeine in it. Lots of tea can also impact your iron absorption. Cola has caffeine in, and chocolate. So there's lots of different sources of caffeine and that you might not expect. So ideally you would avoid that, and obviously no energy drinks, but then the kids don't tend to need them.
So no caffeine. What about for the really littles who are still on the bottle? Good idea or bad idea to send the bottle with the baby to bed?
So again, this is one of those things that is something that in the sleep industry you're told is bad. So it is completely biologically normal for children to fall asleep, young babies in particular, to fall asleep with a feed. It is super normal to do that. And children up till 18 months probably still need a feed in the night. Some of them will still need to feed through the night. So, it could still be normal for those children that they need that. Feeding to sleep is biologically normal way of getting your child to sleep as well. So if parents are tired of doing it, so particularly with breastfeeding, this often lies, heavily on the mothers to have to feed to sleep at bedtime and then all the night wakes as well, and then all the naps, which can feel like a lot. So, you can work on swapping that for a different sleep association, a different sleep cue. It's probably the hardest one to change just because it is so ingrained in our bodies that we will fall asleep when we're feeding. So I don't have an opinion on it either way. But if the parents and the family are struggling with that mode of getting the child to sleep, then absolutely you can move forward to change it. I don't tend to suggest people stop feeding to sleep before 12 months. And that's mostly because it's usually the easiest way to get them to sleep. So you're going to have to do something different that's going to take you longer. It's going to be a lot more effort. And it's going to be frustrating. So, you know, don't feel like you have to get rid of it to get better sleep. But if it's feeling like too much pressure and it's just really hard work to sustain it, then absolutely, if it's right for you, then change it.
Okay.
And obviously, when children are older, if they're having a bottle when they go to bed, there's the question of the teeth, and not having milk, not having the bottle of milk, drinking the milk, and then just going straight to sleep. They do need to brush the teeth afterwards because the milk can damage the teeth. They need to brush the teeth after they've had a drink of milk to clear the sugars away, so that they're not going to damage the teeth. And there is a bit of evidence about they're needing to remove the bottle, drinking out of a bottle after about 12 months, just because it can impact the shape of your palate with the sucking. And again, obviously the impact on teeth. So there's a few kind of medical, physiological reasons why you would stop bottle feeding right before bed. But as far as feeding to sleep, if you're happy to do that, then, you know, I'm happy to support families that want to maintain that, because particularly the breastfeeding relationship is really important, and trying to support that for as long as possible. And this is where dads can come in as well, right? I know sometimes dads wonder how they can support with things like that if the mother is breastfeeding and doing that for, you know, a long period of time. I know some dads find that difficult as to where they fit in with some of that. Did you have that experience, or do you have that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but you know, especially you have these little kids and you want to bond with them, and there's such a natural way that mom's doing it. I mean, it's not just natural, necessary. You know, it's like survival's dependent on it.
Yeah.
So what do I do as a dad? Yeah.
And I think that's definitely a challenge for lots of parents that I speak to, definitely. And what I would like to just reassure all the dads that are listening to this, and all the non-feeding parents that are listening to this, because obviously there are the, you know, couples who there may be two females and one might be feeding, one might not be. So for the non-feeding parent, there are loads of other ways that you bond with your child. Feeding is not the only way that you bond with your baby. You bond with your child through eye contact, through touch, through communication, through play, through your presence there all the time. So whilst it can look like, and the word you used was when you would talk about the mums, it's like they're feeding, it's easy for them to bond that way. And actually, I think sometimes it's not. I think sometimes it's not that easy to bond with your baby. I didn't bond with my son till he was about 4 months old. I just couldn't connect with him. I was so overwhelmed that I genuinely didn't feel this flush of love as soon as he was placed in my arms. And I kept saying to my husband, I don't feel it yet. I don't feel it yet. He's like, don't worry, it'll come. And then, 4 months, I was like, oh my God, I feel it now. I get it. So even for the mums, you don't always necessarily feel like you're bonding through that feeding process, but I can appreciate from the outsider looking in at this what looks like an amazing connection. You might think, oh God, I'll never have that. But there are so many other ways that dads and other parents and other caregivers can bond over and above feeding. And if you're worried about how to support the feeding parent, there's loads of other stuff you can do with that as well. You know, you can take over as soon as the feed's finished. You can wind the baby. You can go and settle them. You can change the nappy. You can go and then rock them to sleep after a feed. You could do the cuddle nap afterwards. There are so many other ways that you can bond with your child. But yeah, there is this huge emphasis on breastfeeding being the main thing, and it's not. It's really not. So I think it's people having the confidence to find the way that they feel connected with their child.
Yeah, it's good. That's really good. What other thoughts do you have, or were you thinking about sharing?
I don't know. I think we've talked about a lot, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a whole lot. Yeah. And it's all been money. Money, really good stuff.
Anything specifically that you can think for the dads? Because I'm conscious that obviously it's the Intentional Dad Fathers podcast, and I'd hate it for them to feel like they've not got something specifically for them that would be a great nugget. Although I think we've talked about the things that they probably think about, you know, the stresses of play before bed, bonding separately outside of the feeding dyad. Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
not sure.
I'm not sure this is real dad specific, but what did you have any advice when the young child's sleeping rhythm is like opposite? They're awake during the night and sleeping during the day.
Sure. Yeah. So with very young babies, this is really normal. When we're born, the babies don't have any established circadian rhythm, and your circadian rhythm is your internal body clock. And eventually, after about 10 or 12 weeks, that circadian rhythm regulates to tell the body that you will sleep more at night time and you'll be awake more at daytime. So in the first 3 months, what we call the fourth trimester, children do just essentially nap all day long. So you will have these periods where they're awake a lot at night and sleep more during the daytime. That's really frustrating, but just know that that will change. And you can kind of shape that by making sure that you've got darkness all night and you've got a lot of light during the daytime, because that is the main thing that will establish that circadian rhythm. For older children, what happens is somewhere between about 12 and 18 months, you do have a period where these toddlers might have these what we call split nights, where they'll wake up at 2 a.m. and they'll be awake till 4 or 5 a.m. just wide awake, and you're like, what are you doing? Go back to sleep. And there's nothing you can do to get them back to sleep. These are called split nights, and they're really common around times of development. So I see them a lot when children start walking, when language skills are really bursting. So when there's a lot of development going on, I often see split nights happen. And if they're happening like once a week, a couple of times a month, then you just have to suck it up. You just have to kind of go, right, that was a really rough night. Let's carry on tomorrow, and hopefully it won't happen tomorrow. They can also happen if it happens like every day for 3 or 4 days for a couple of weeks. Then what's usually happened is there's a mismatch in the circadian rhythm and when sleep happens. And it's usually because they're either getting up too late in the morning, they're in bed for too long at night time. So sometimes if they're in bed for 12 hours, they're only really going to sleep for 10, like I said earlier. Often children will only sleep 10 or 11 hours. So if they're in bed for 12 hours, they're going to be awake for a couple of hours because they just don't need 12 hours of sleep. So sometimes it's because the night is too long. Sometimes it's because they've done too long a nap in the daytime. And you have to kind of fiddle around with the timing. So typically I would say if they're in bed for a long time overnight and they're awake for a good chunk of a couple of hours, you need to reduce that length of the night. So they either have to get up earlier or go to bed later. Or if that doesn't work, then you need to reduce the length of the nap. And you gradually want to do that in kind of 15-minute increments just to test that balance of what works. And usually after a few days of getting on top of the timings, you'll find that those split nights end up closing. But they are quite a tricky thing to manage, split nights, when it's a circadian rhythm problem, because it's about timings and just, again, figuring out what works for your child. But some of them are very normal developmental things that will just pass.
Well, this is all good advice. When kids are sleeping good, life is great. When they're not sleeping good, life is horrible. I remember someone told me, sleep deprivation was used as a form of torture.
Yeah.
It's just not good, not pleasant to experience. So anything we can do to avoid a torturous experience is
true.
better.
And I think with that in mind as well, Aaron, it's a timely reminder to just come back to what you said at the start about giving yourself some grace.
Yeah.
How your child sleeps is not a reflection on how good a parent you are. And that's how it makes us feel. We go, oh, I'm a terrible mom, I'm a terrible dad because they don't sleep. All my other friends' children sleep. Why doesn't my child sleep? It's because I'm doing this wrong or I'm doing that wrong. 9 times out of 10, it's just because they're going through a development phase or they need to have some adjustment to their routine or something. It's not a reflection on you as a parent. And it's just holding on to that when times are tough, remembering that in your heart. And you can only do what you can do. with the information that you have at the time. So it's seeking out people who, like me, an expert in the field, who you like their style, you like what they're about, what they say seems to resonate with you as a family. Go and follow those people, go and find that community and get support that way. And there's loads of really good resources out there to get some great advice about sleep. And there's also some rubbish stuff as well. So you've got to pick what feels right for you, because you know best. And you don't always think it, but you know best. So if something doesn't feel right, it's not right. So find the right resource, find the right expert to work with, and find the right community that sits with your family ethos, I would say.
Yeah. Well, if some listeners or watchers appreciate your style, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, yes. Well, I am called Blissed Out Babies, and that's my handle on Instagram. So at Blissed Out Babies. My website is blissedoutbabies.co.uk, and I am happy to chat over messages. I've got some free resources on my website and a growing toddler community of parents who are all struggling. So you can always come and join us if you feel like that would help. But absolutely, people can get in touch with me on Instagram or via my website. Happy to chat, and I don't charge for every message. I will. If I don't think I can help you, I don't take your money. That is my motto.
Well, that's good integrity, a great way of running a business. I'll make sure I put the handle and the website in the show notes, so people can just click on that. Thanks for taking some time to talk to me today.
I love talking about sleep.
What do you love more, talking about sleep or sleeping?
Oh, definitely sleeping.